everybody for accommodating me. I wanted to be there in person, but unfortunately, a close friend's mom passed away, and I am now in the Washington, D.C. area. But we can make this work with technology, and thanks for having me here. I did send along some handouts that have my contact information, have the phone number, excuse me, and the email. Feel free to use either one of those. If you want to text, you can text that phone number as well as it rolls over the computer. So that's the quick way of how to get a hold of me. As you guys know, my name's Harry Bernstein. We live in the Aurora area. Lived in Northeast Ohio my whole life. My wife's lived in the Aurora. It's the city of Aurora her whole life. So we're fairly active in the community. Our son Nelson is going to be 22 in a couple of weeks. He was diagnosed on the spectrum. He seems slow to develop, but we actually started looking at these things. He was diagnosed being on the spectrum about 2 years old, and none of us had any real experience with working within the systems and the cards you're dealt. If we were first time parents in the first place, let alone having these other things to work on. And so we really gained a lot of information working with our district, which was great. They pointed us in the right direction to find resources. And with my background as an attorney and just taking a step back, we had a family business. I did our in-house work, mostly employment, workers' compensation law, and then I expanded to disability. So when he was born, I had a good idea of how the Social Security disability system and the resources that come along with that, Medicare, Medicaid, kind of had a basic idea how those things work. So, we sat down and we said, what are we going to do? How are we going to, give him the best opportunity to live his own life? And we were fortunate enough to find some resources, and that's why I want to talk to everybody here today, mostly about. We're going to focus today on guardianship and supported decision making, which is one huge piece of a larger plan. But and I'm not pitching anything. Don't get me wrong, but it involves a whole bunch of planning and advocating. This is a piece of it. It's a big piece. When someone turns 18 years old, they get all the rights and almost all the rights, I should say that. They're still not allowed to consume alcohol or tobacco, but excluding that, they have all the rights and they have all the responsibilities of any other adult. That means they're responsible for their own actions. They don't legally need help or need people to help to make decisions. Any 18-year-old needs help as far as I'm concerned. And I always say that everybody needs some of these backup and protection tools we're going to talk about. Doesn't matter what age, to help you avoid problems and deal with problems down the line. But at 18, our kids are adults. And at that point, they're responsible for their own actions. So we have three choices. Choices: turn them loose, you're on your own. Well, that's not really an option. It is. Maybe some people think it's an option. It's not the best. I wouldn't advise it. And I'm sure maybe in rare instances, it may be the best option, but generally not. Option number one is supported decision-making. Let's let them live their own lives, but let's help. And we have tools that the law says we can use these tools to legally help them and help them undo decisions that they may have made, bad choices, but help them make the right choices, whether it be their health care or financial decisions or education decisions. And I do call it as the option of last resort. Is when an individual really can't take care of themselves, and without somebody for the most part, completely overseeing their life, there's going to be a danger to them. So that's guardianship. And whether somebody needs guardianship or not is a decision made by the courts. It's the probate court that makes that decision. It's not the parent's decision. It's not the grandparents' decision. It's not the city's or the federal government's decision. What they want to do is say what's best for the child. Certainly, if both parents advocate for guardianship and then the medical evidence supports it, the judges will more than often than not go with a parent being a guardian. The reason I say a parent is most courts they prefer to put one person in charge. That's it's as much for anything else as administrative purposes. And, it's just, you're in charge, you're responsible for the reporting. Yes, you and your spouse or whoever it may be can raise the child together. And it doesn't have to be a parent, could be a grandparent if the parents are out of the picture, but it's what's in the child's best interest. So those are the basics of what we're looking at. How do we prepare our children to live, the life that they want to live within certain constraints and giving them help? So, I start with guardianship first, even though it's to me it's the option of last resort, but it's the easiest to explain. When somebody can't take care of themselves, whether it's on the early part of their life, because once they turn 18, when I say early part of life, when somebody's born, their parents are responsible for it. Just if that wasn't clear, for the actions of that individual and the health and safety of that individual too. So if and we all have plenty, your child's a knucklehead and he goes out and rides his bike into somebody's car and dents the car, then your homeowner's insurance more than likely is going to cover the repairs. The child's not responsible. Once they hit 18, that goes out the window. At that point, and one thing I want to stress is these conversations, and why we're talking tonight, is to help you start dealing with these things. And when I talk about guardianship or supported decision making, you really are looking at those things about a year out. What are we going to do here? And that involves talking to your doctors, talking to an attorney or someone who may have an idea of what's going on, of giving you the information you need, and saying, look, it just, Sally or Billy just is not going to be making it on their own. We need guardianship. They're wheelchair bound, non-communicative. And unfortunately, we think that's the only option. You gather all the medical records. The courts in Portage County are phenomenal. They will help you every step of the way. I tell people that. I said a lot of times you don't need to call an attorney if you're pretty clear on if it's a pretty clear-cut situation. You go to the court, they will give you the right documents. They'll point you in the correct steps to go, which involve getting medical evidence. The prospective guardians undergo background checks. The court sends court investigators to make sure everything is safe. You apply for guardianship. The judge decides is that appropriate or not. Name you as the guardian, then you're responsible for the safety and welfare of that individual. As well as filing reports with the court periodically. Just here's how it's going, and here's what our next set of plans are. The cons to it is your child loses their independence for the most part. It can be an expensive process. It's heavily administrative. I shouldn't say heavily. It can be very, very demanding administratively especially if you're managing. Somehow they have large sums of money, and there's large expenditures as well. Those all have to be accounted for. There are various types of guardianships. There's a full guardianship, which means you're entitled for all of their care and financial. There's limited, where you're just in charge of guardianship of the person. And then there's also temporary guardianships, and there's also trying to think of the fourth off the top of my head, but there's a variety of guardianships so you can choose, and depending on what one you do, it's how much reports you're going to file with the court. But again, that's the last resort. Supported decision making is, hey, how can we help our kids make those decisions? Because legally, the minute your child is 18, under a lot of the privacy rules and everything, you cannot get involved without their verbal authorization in their healthcare or financial decisions. So, for example, and I know most of the hospitals and clinics are doing it this way, they're usually notifying parents 6 months out, hey, we need an advanced healthcare directive so we can talk to you about your child's medical treatment. And whether it's treatment or just exams, they can't give you legally any information unless you're authorized to get that. So we advise you think about those things, prepare those things, and as close to the date of the birthday, have those things in place so you can turn them over to the medical providers. So what am I talking about with supported decision making? There's 5 key documents I say that, in a way I was taught, everybody should have when they're doing what's called estate planning, but it's really planning for potential end of life situations and actually when you pass the last will. Everybody thinks of the last will and testament. That's the least important, especially when it comes to young people. They generally don't have assets. The will is what explains how I want and who I want to take care of everything once I pass. So that may be, if you have kids, who's going to be their guardian. That may be who's going to run your business or whatever. So that's what, and then you're going to say who's in charge of handling that. Generally, it's the spouse becomes the executor. So that's the will. That's not what we're talking about today, though. When I prepare the documents, I prepare them all together. The next piece, which is important, is called the general power of attorney or financial power of attorney. This is where your child is going to authorize you to allow you to step into their shoes if need be for any non-health type of decision or interaction. So, for example, let's say they get a credit card and they decide they're going to buy $6,000 worth of video games. You can go in and start to talk to the negotiate with the credit card companies and say, look, he didn't do this. He didn't know what he was doing. I can help him. Or you want to just help him set up a bank account. You can go in and do that with the financial power of attorney. Technically, you can use it for educational records, but most schools want what's called a FERPA, which is another education release. We prepare those too, but legally they're supposed to honor the general power of attorney. So that's your financial. And now we've got our healthcare documents. How can you help them manage their healthcare? They're called advanced directives. One's called a living will. One is called a healthcare power of attorney. It's where an individual says, this is how I want my healthcare decisions to be made and my end of life care decisions. God forbid that happens. And this is who's going to carry it out for me. So again, your child fills out these papers, signs them, has to be cognitive of what they're signing. So as an attorney, I'm going to request some things if you want this to understand, so that, hey, do you understand that we're doing this? Or I'll say, do you know what we're doing here? And then we'll go back and forth. The point being that they understand that they're giving mom, dad, or whoever the authority to help them do these things. You sign the document, I notarize it. And the only thing, everything can be notarized except for a will. In Ohio, a will still has to be witnessed by two people. It's one of the few documents left. Everything else can be notarized. So in Ohio, there's a living will and healthcare power of attorney. A lot of states have combined those. Ohio hasn't yet. So we recommend those. Those are now 4 documents. The 5th document is a HIPAA medical release. And that just gives you access to the records where you don't necessarily need a power of attorney. Power of attorney is more to discuss the healthcare. You need some medical records. Let's say they're going to summer camp with Boy Scouts, and you just got to grab a set of records from the clinic. You send them the HIPAA release, and they keep it, or they've already got it on file in theory, and then they shoot you off the records on a flash drive or a disk. It shouldn't be a problem that way. The other thing about a HIPAA release is we see that and use that a lot of times where maybe, and this is for more people planning, more adults, more experienced, they want their brother or a cousin who's involved. So technically, let's say it's end of healthcare and you're sitting in a bed somewhere and everybody's deciding what's going to happen. A HIPAA release will let the doctors discuss that with anybody who's on the paper without them having the authority to make decisions, if that makes sense. So it's really allowing somebody in the room to speak to the doctor. Now, most compassionate doctors will have those conversations. They don't dig into paperwork at that point, but other ones use it in institutions, use it as an excuse. I've seen plenty of places fight some issues when it comes to car accident cases that I handle, and they don't want to release the records for one reason or another. And then we have to resort to these things. So whatever that happens. So what are the pros of that? Is this going to maximize your child's autonomy? They are living their own life. They are making their decisions with your guidance and then your ability to help them recorrect if need be or whatever. It's not taking away that independence that a guardianship would. The other pros, there's no filing and reporting requirements. I mean, you're helping your child. You don't have to report any of this to the court. What are the cons? The cons are you need to be very careful with appointing the right person, because we've seen instances where the child will appoint or again, sign off on some documents. I'll tell you a sad story, and I won't say what district it is. It's Northeast Ohio. That when it was a child's IEP meeting and he was going to be 18 and they turned 18, the district said, you don't need your parents here for that meeting anymore. Why don't you just sign off on your IEP? Not ethical, not moral, in my opinion, but completely legal. Kid's 18, you sign this document here, Billy, and now we don't have to worry about your mom and dad asking for extra school year or whatever it may be. ESY, whatever it may be. So those are some of the things we watch out for. And really that's the basics of what's available. Then the question becomes, how do we do this? What do we plan ahead? Start planning now. Have those conversations with your doctors. Doctors aren't lawyers, and they're not meant to be, and lawyers aren't doctors, but find out exactly what their needs are going to be, what they are now, what they're going to be going forward. So again, put yourself in that situation. There used to be a rush to guardianship. I think people have figured out, and we learned in the 22 years our son's been around, is there are more ways and more opportunities to get people involved in a full life than just, and I'm not knocking it, but we all know the old ways that you're going to a workshop to cut bookmarks. Well, now that's not the case. We have job training and OOD and programs like the programs at Kent. We have great institutions like where our son goes, and I'm probably telling too much personal information. That's where he goes to Stark State because he wants to be in the food business. Kids are getting jobs where, certainly not my age, but even 15 years ago, nobody would have given them the opportunity to get a job. So let's plan those things. What are they going to need? What are they going to do? Get the information you need. And then when time comes to make those decisions, you want to try to do it as close to their 18th birthday as possible. The other huge advantage to picking the road of power of attorneys and guidance is you can always go for guardianship later if that's not working out. If you get a guardianship, it is very difficult and time consuming to undo, because now you've got to go back to court and prove that the individual can take care of themselves with assistance. So again, it is an option of last resort to help you help your children. And those are the basics of it. I'm a big question and answer guy. I've given this. I try to teach this to everybody, whether they're friends or, again, our peer group. All the kids had some form of not all the kids, but again, that's a lot of the people you associated. And I say, look, I don't care if you use me, go to LegalZoom, go to Rocket Lawyer, whatever. Do something, because you don't want to, again, God forbid. And, we hope we never need to use these documents. We hope our child goes out and is perfect, and we don't need to do these things, but they're good to have there. And that's why we do them. And then they can be adjusted as they move on through life. As they're earning income, we can do some things there. Maybe that, they find somebody and they find a spouse, and we make those adjustments there because things are going to change. So start your planning, start putting those safeguards in place. The goal is not for your child to live what you want them to be. The goal is for them to live what they want to be and do. And they, whether you've got cognitive needs or not, you got to figure it out. But this gives you a way to help them figure it out. Say, hey, let me get your school records to see if you're doing what you're saying, or I'll be able to log into your account now, or your counselor can contact me directly if there's a problem, because we've had that authorization in place. So, because if you don't have those in place, you're going to have a difficult time. And again, that's the basics of it. And like I said, I'm more of a question and answer guy anyways. So I hope you guys have some questions for me.
Do we have any questions from the audience yet? And then I can ask them to Harry.
Like I said, email me. One thing too is, and if it's something you don't feel like discussing in public over this, just like I said, email me, shoot me a text or call. I won't be home for a couple of days, but you can call anyways. But yeah, that's not an issue too. But general questions, have at it.
So was there a big difference? Like, I'm just trying to understand between like a guard. I don't know a lot about this, and it's something I've avoided. But our son will be 18 in January, and I guess one of the things that I have a niece who has Down syndrome, and I know her mother did the guardian. One of the things I've always felt weird to me about is giving up control of being a parent to my kid to a court. What are the different levels again? And what am I doing here if I start looking into this?
Can you hear him okay, Harry? It's basically like the different levels of guardianship.
Well, there's guardians of the person, and I think he said something that I thought was interesting. There's guardian of the person where you're just responsible for the court to make sure that they're living a healthy life. You've got to file healthcare plans with the doctors, and there's guardian of the person in the state where you're managing their money as well. And you can do guardian of the state separately, but I don't see it happen that often. But you said something about you see your role as a parent changing. I thought you said that, and can you make that a little more clear?
No, it feels like part of the reason I've avoided looking at was something that I guess my feeling from when my aunt did this with her daughter, my cousin actually, is that it was almost like giving up your parental rights, giving up being a parent.
So actually, when you become the child's guardian, it's a permanent parental rights situation. It's the opposite. You're not giving up your parental rights, but now you're legalized. You're putting into the system that you are in fact their legal guardian and responsible. When you're a parent, by law you're responsible. Now by law you're accepting that responsibility and acknowledging that responsibility and telling the court that you're going to continue with that responsibility. So it actually becomes, and I don't mean that being a parent is burdensome, but it's more burdensome. It's like you're becoming a professional parent, and that you're getting, you're not getting paid for it, but you have to do these things, and you have to, file those reports. And anytime they want to, they can come walking in your door with an investigator. It doesn't happen. Don't get me wrong, unless there's a real problem. But that generally doesn't happen. But those are the things. And that's why, again, it's another reason I say that's your option of last resort. We have a good friend of ours. He's got Downs, and he's not, that no court would grant guardianship because he's got the abilities to live his life with guidance from his parents. He works at a restaurant 4 or 5 days a week. And then, he's your typical 21-year-old, really. So just happen to have a medical condition. I'm overweight. I got a medical condition. So, and again, just to tell you, hey, I've got all these documents too. My wife is the power of attorney and vice versa. And then the second piece of it I didn't really mention is, even though we don't have, as I said, we try to avoid co-powers of attorney because the courts don't like that. But we do have alternates. So if my wife can't do it, or again, something happens to the two of us, then my brother steps in. Some families have one parent become the financial power of attorney, another parent become the healthcare power of attorney, because they're two totally different skills. And somebody who's qualified, in our situation, the alternate is a close friend of ours on the healthcare, but she's a nurse. So she knows how to talk to doctors when it comes that time. And those understands more than talk to them, but understand them as much as anything else. and those are and the other piece, which I always mention, I usually mention it somewhere and then forget about it and then mention it at the end, is you as parents need these things in place, because you can put them in for your child, and if you walk out the door and get hit by a car tomorrow and you don't have your documents in place, then you got a big problem. So again, I'm not salesman guy. I'm not pitching you. I'm just, what we do is, my uncle always told me, he kind of mentored me as an attorney, we have to tell the people the bad things that could happen and how we're going to help them deal with it or prevent it where we can. So that's what we do. And that's the thing. So again, if your child's not going to be 18 for a year, then work on your stuff first. Right, get your 5 documents in order, and if you've got a considerable number of assets, or either one of you has health care or disability issues, we deal with that as well too. We let, and again, I'm getting into more disability general planning. We let relatives know, you know what, so and so might be getting federal and state benefits. So I know you want to leave them $2,000, but they'll lose their benefits. Let's talk about what we can do for that too. But that's all part of the bigger piece. But it's like a puzzle. They all go together for the most part. Certain things are a little bit less important, but your documents, especially if your child's not 18, you need to do that. And if he is 18 or she is 18, you should do all 3 at the same time, or one, or depends on the situation. I shouldn't make assumptions. So.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Anything else right now? Are there?
Well, let me talk about the other stuff you should plan for then, because I don't mind. So I talked about parents getting their stuff in order. We talked about guardianship. We talked about powers of attorneys. One thing you also need to consider, and I just touched on it, was, will they need and be eligible for federal benefits? And primarily I'm talking about SSI, so supplemental security income, potentially SSD, but those are federal benefits available to people to provide income when they can't provide for themselves. Now, SSD, Social Security Disability, is disability insurance that we pay into the system. So if we can't, if that's there for when we retire, but if we become disabled as adults, we can draw on that as long as we prove to the court we can't work due to our disability, whether it's an injury, an illness, or whatever. Supplemental security income is effectively, and I hate the term welfare only because it's been ill-defined by many other people, but it's assistance from the government for people who haven't paid into the system but aren't going to be able to work. And it's a means-based test, which means you can have very little assets and very little income. Now, the difference is when somebody's disabled and living with their parents, they count their income. Once your child becomes 18, your income does not, or assets do not count as that child's. So all of a sudden, if mom and dad are making a nice living wage, and unfortunately, even if they're barely above the poverty level, the Social Security Administration considers it a nice living wage when you and I know it's not. But once they turn 18, those things don't count against their ability to collect SSI. And then you just apply and show the medical need, and you can receive benefits for that. There's other things we can do there as far as planning and protecting assets and things like that. So that's SSI. But what you're going to need to do is, again, at a few months out, start collecting the medical evidence, start collecting all the documentation from the schools to show that, look, the child's just not going to be able to work. They're eligible for SSI because of these medical conditions. You make your application, and then they may decide right away. There are some instances where children are already on SSI because the parents' income is low. And then when they're 18, they do a redetermination. And sometimes they pull kids off SSI. And then you've got to go back. The one thing that you can do is while you appeal, they will continue to pay your benefits. But you've got to prove your case now. And that's become a nightmare because, frankly, I call them the way I see them, is The federal government pretty much put a directive down to the judges at one point, and it was under the Bush administration, both of them. No, not both of them, but the second Bush, that we wanted to reduce the number of people receiving assistance. And these judges went from approval rates of somewhere around 75% to under 50%. That's not a statistical. That's a statistical outlier. That doesn't happen without direction from above to go from 75 to under 50. So we've seen those things. And again, you have to go and prove your case. So that's SSI. And generally along with SSI comes Medicaid. And Medicaid is the healthcare coverage there too. Sometimes a child can collect SSDI, which are the benefits are a little larger. Under their parents, if their parents have retired and paid into the system or collecting some, so it gets a little complicated there. But the point being is, start planning for these things. If you think so, for example, certain conditions are automatic approvals, and I believe Downs is one of them. So it's just getting your documentation in order. Again, that's only if the child's not going to be able to earn an income and work, right? The goal of SSD and SSI are to get people back on their feet where we can, so we did, and I'm not going to name names, but there are plenty of politicians who are out there calling it welfare who received SSDI on their father's earnings before they became politicians. Now it's evil when it's helping somebody else, whatever. We live with those people every day. But again, gather all your medical evidence, get these things in order. One other thing about preparing for SSI or SSD is they will reduce benefits if you're giving housing assistance. So if the child's living at home, but what you can do and should do is create a lease, because if you can show that some of that money is being paid forward, it actually keeps their benefit. There's a calculation they do, and it can keep the raising bit. Fortunately, the administration we have now has done a lot for people who are disabled. I'm not making a pitch tonight before voting. I'm just telling you the facts. They've expanded the opportunity for families to care for their own kids in home and provide financial assistance there. They have increased the amount of petitions that receive automatic approval, and they've really done a good job of moving that caseload through that can have you up to 2 years waiting for a hearing. So again, I'm not telling you who to vote. I'm just telling you who did what. So that's what's going on there. So that's another big thing to consider as the child. The other one I would say is, if you're not doing it now, make sure, and by law, we all should be working on transition plans from 14 in Ohio. Make sure you're getting OOD involved, Ohio Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities. They have a ton of resources that aren't necessarily means-based, but as long as it's helping someone move towards employment, there's money and there's resources. For example, again, our son, he wanted to learn how to drive. I approached our OOD case manager. She said, hey, driving now is an integral part of employment. There's no doubt you can get a better job if you can hop in a car and go 10 miles away instead of you're restricted to the little, if you're lucky enough to have public transportation, you're not restricted to that small area. So we talked to her, and I will pitch one guy, Wally's Driving School down in Cuyahoga Falls. He only teaches individuals with cognitive disabilities and adults who are learning to drive later in life, because it's a different type of and he knows how to work with the system, meaning schedule the lessons and apply, submit the billing the correct way. And we got it approved, and Nelson took his lessons, and they paid for him as long as he was improving and learning, and he got his license, and nobody could have been happier than we were for him. He doesn't like to drive much, which is fine, but it was an accomplishment for him, and he does drive. So, and we waited a few years. He didn't get it till he was 19 or 20. And it's just a great thing. But OOD can do it. They have a lot of money to go towards tuitions at both 4-year and 2-year schools. And that, so which leads me to my biggest thing is, you don't get if you don't ask. There is no harm in asking. build your team, which is your medical people, your family, your educational people. Build your team and your administrative people in the state agencies, and then all work together and say, what's the goal? So in our case, Nelson wants to go into the food business. He's got a great job, but he also had an opportunity to get his culinary degree down there, and OOD is assisting with that. There's some tuition money there. And that goes, I believe, again, there's not necessarily a medical component to all of these things, because they now might fall into a different bucket of money, but I know they have programs for veterans. They have programs for people who've been unemployed and just need, I know they will shop for interview clothes. Some people have been homeless. They can't, the clothes they have, they can't wear to an interview. So they'll go out and get them interviewed. They'll teach how to write a resume. They'll teach new skills. So all of these opportunities are there. It's just a matter of coordinating. The biggest need and the biggest problem in the system, in my opinion, but I think a lot of people, is transportation. Nobody can get the transportation piece, because I had a friend, he just got back from Europe. Public transportation is so much better everywhere but in this country, and it needs to be better for all of us. But again, there's ways to use that and work around that. So that's I'm trying to think. That's the basics of it. Find your team. That's number one. Find your team. Find out what your child loves, and it's been interesting because, well, he wants to be an astronaut. It's like, okay, well, how do we do that? What other programs are available? It might be working at NASA down there. We had a friend, he loves to fish, and so he's working at Dick's Sporting Goods. He's looking at working with the county and their or the Ohio Department of Natural Resources to see if they have programs too. And there's a lot of good providers out there that'll help you. OOD will help you. Most of our school districts around here are pretty good. They'll point you in the right direction. And employers love employees who show up. And most of our kids love to go to work if it's something they like, and they're not gonna. Hey, and I was a knucklehead one day too. They're not going to skip work because they had a big night the night before, generally. And I saw that. I used to be in another field that involved the restaurant business. And the worst, and they still have it, is turnover, because somebody said, you know what, I don't feel like going into work today at Winking Lizard because I can go to Ruby Tuesdays and get a job there because they need people. So they don't show up to work. But again, there's so much opportunity, and we need to believe in our kids and help our kids. And then if you need guardianship, you do it. And you do it lovingly, and it's fine. You get by. Anything else? And ask me any questions that I tell everybody, even if I don't do this kind of law. I've been practicing law for close to 40 years. I went to law school with about 400 other people, so I can pick up a phone and point you in the right direction and say, look, I don't do, health insurance. There's a lot of people making claims against their home insurance and health. I don't do that, but I got a guy who does that, or whatever it may be. Criminal law, I want no part of that. If you're in that situation, somebody, I can point you to 3 great people who do criminal law. Divorce law is another one. I don't want anything to do with that.
So what level, you mentioned you have a 22-year-old son. What level of the guardianship or whatever are you applying to your own situation?
So it depends on the medical evidence. I mean, 22 is effectively like 18. So he's 22. He's responsible for all of his actions. It's a matter of you talking to the doctors and you as a parent making that decision. Look, if I have these other pieces, and again, let's start with the least restrictive. If I have these other authorizations where I can go to school or go to his job coach or talk to the bank and set him up, can he or she be fine? Can we do these things this way first? You know what? It's not working. He's a danger. He or she becomes a danger to themselves for some reason or whatever. Then you go to the court and say, look, I need guardianship. And then you can go down that road too. And really they're going to look at the guardianship turns on for the most part, the medical evidence, the the court report when they do their investigation, and then the judge getting to know the parents too. And the judge will, most of them are pretty good at what they do. Now the ones in probate for years now in Ravenna have been very good at what they do. So
it's kind of like a variable. It's not like an all or nothing. It's kind of like a step by step as needed.
Yeah, that's the way I approach it. Again, there might be clear instances where, if it's an individual who's wheelchair bound, non-communicative, and needs 24-hour medical care, it's a guardianship situation. I mean, it's not anything wrong. It's not anything bad, but that's what the courts have in place to make it simpler, that you just go, you make those decisions and you sign off on those things, file a report with the court once a year. I just wrote a one-page letter. It was for friends of mine. I didn't even do the original guardianship, that says, look, mom and the dad and the son have a great life together. She's been his guardian for the last 15 years. She's doing a great job. I'm just advising, I've been an attorney for 30 years. Based upon my knowledge, I think she's still an excellent guardian. You file that report with the court. Basically, it's that letter, a couple letters from the doctors. If you are managing the estate, the financial money, in this case, it's just the guardianship of the person, you're good to go. Then the next year, sometimes courts put it off, but the next year you file your report and do the same thing. The only contingencies you put in place is, again, going back to your documents, what's going to happen if I go, right? So then you're going to put those other things in place for the guardians. And that's also why we have the alternates on the powers of attorney and the healthcare directives, because even if nothing happens to you, but let's say you're not around, you're at a business meeting in California, and there's a health issue going on right here in Ravenna, well, you can handle it, and whatever. So the other person can step right in, and the alternate can step right in and deal with the situation. But yeah, timing is 18's the only date that matters as far as age. So after that, it's all the same. Before that, it's all the same too. So yeah.
Do we have any questions? I don't think we have any more questions at this time. I just think it was great what you said about like building your team of people.
Oh, that's number one.
Yeah, so many of the agencies that you mentioned are actually here tonight. So giving everybody a chance to kind of build their team of people and look at some of those resources. So I'm really glad that you kind of hit home with that one.
Right. Yeah. And it involves, if you've got considerable assets and you've got financial people, advisors, then you want to include them. And again, one thing to remember, one thing you need to stress sometimes, because it's happened to me, is your financial guy is not a lawyer. Your lawyer's not a financial advisor, and neither one of them are medical advisors, because I've had financial advisors try to tell my clients one thing about trust, which was completely wrong. And unfortunately, it's because he was going to lose some money with what we wanted to do. So, but that's why it's a team, and you work these things out together. And on the other hand, I got some incredible financial advisors I work with who get that piece as well. So, say, hey, we need you guys in and whatever. So, but yeah, it's working as a team, because ultimately everybody wants to help our kids. They may think there's different ways to do it, but ultimately almost everybody, we want the same end result, which is what the child wants their end result to be. So how do we do that? Well, we can do A, B, C today. And then again, it's constantly adjusting like any other plan is. You know what? You wanted to be in the cooking business, and now you don't like it. So let's look at what the other opportunities are. Yeah. So, but yeah, building the team's number one. Getting your documents is number two. Building a team, figuring out what your child wants, getting your documents, and then taking care of their documents at 18. And then, it's somebody's. Yeah, I don't like the term "life's not easy" because nothing's easy, but life can be fun. Fun isn't always easy.
There you go. Do we have any other questions? Harry, we're gonna, if it's okay, we'll share your email.
Yeah.
And then that way, if people have questions after today, they can go ahead and email you directly, and we'll be sure to upload your video to our website for reference. That way, if people had some questions, they can go ahead and rewatch that, and then we can continue to make those connections.
Right. And if I set it up right, it's recording along with captions, so there should be a transcript too. So
yes, I see that. Thank you so much.
Yeah. We'll see what happens, but